Welcome to Symbolic Convergence theory and what we do here in rhetoric, which is fantasy theme analysis. So again, remember that rhetorical methods are based in theory. And so here at Symbolic Convergence theory, and from that we have the method that is known as fantasy theme analysis. Now, technically, fantasy theme analysis came first. Borman developed it as an analytic method. And then people said, shouldn't there really be a theory? And he said, oh, yeah, you're right, as we developed symbolic convergence theory, which you may or may not have discussed or remember discussing in, say, communication theory. So as we begin discussing symbolic convergence theory and fantasy theme analysis, one of the challenges sometimes for my students is distinguishing between how this theory and method functions differently from narrative paradigm theory and narrative criticism, which we discussed last time. So I'll take just a moment to to review just briefly narrative criticism. So narrative criticism, you might remember this slide, is about the moral of the story, and that had a lot to do with the values. What values do people have to to accept or believe that story? What values or moral is the rhetor asking the audience to accept, to endorse, to believe in? Right, that was very much the focus of narrative criticism. Right, so what are the values being endorsed there? In a word or two of fantasy theme analysis, we would say it's a shared vision. So think about shared vision for a moment. If you recall the definition of rhetoric I gave back at the beginning, way back when, right at the beginning of the class, and I said it had to do with the creation of reality through symbols. So this is about a vision, it being a vision like of the world, like that. You know, what is the vision you have of the world? What's this reality of events that you have? But notice the word before vision is shared. It's a shared vision. So we're interested in how people come to look at the world in the same way. Or I guess perhaps more the point, what are the stories that people tell, right, amongst each other that represents how they share a common vision of the world, and that it keeps that vision sort of active and strong, and I guess use the metaphor of vision, it keeps that vision vivid and right and compelling. Right? So it's a shared vision of the world shared by a group. So it's a shared vision of the world shared by a group or as shared by a group. That's what this is very much about. And so in doing fantasy theme analysis, we're looking into which images, words, or references, and I'm going to talk about this a bit more, but which images, words, or references trigger a, if you will, deeper meaning. So how do they trigger a quote-unquote deeper meaning? So a story is told, but how does that story resonate with an audience in a certain way? How do certain words tell the audience more of how they should feel? How does it remind them of certain events, certain experiences, certain shared, again, ways of seeing the world? Right? And how do they bond people together? We don't get as deeply into this with this method, but that's what the theory is very much about, is how people bond together over that shared image. And you might think for a moment about religion, that religion or spiritual groups, right? I just say, you know, people who identify with different communities that are religious or spiritual in nature, that those are founded around a common vision of the universe, about what has happened, and maybe perhaps even a belief in what has happened, right? And then also, why do things happen? What is our relationship to each other? What is our relationship to the world? What is our relationship just to all else that's in the universe? Right? That's what religious and spiritual beliefs inform us about, is our relationship to all the other things in the universe, past, present, and even future. So symbolic convergence theory, talk about the theory for a moment, is about the sense-making function of communication, and that doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense just right out of the gate there. But sense-making, right? When you make sense of something, right? And to make sense of something, you have to find a way, I keep wanting to say makes sense to you, but you keep finding a way to take what has happened or take what you've heard and put it into a box, if you will, that you already have, that you already understand, right? So when you hear things, say, oh, right, that makes sense to me because it fits with how I understand things work and how they go, right? So it's about the sense-making function, that how is it that uh, we when events happen, how do we put them together in a way that we can process and aligns with what we already know and understand? So symbolic convergence theory is called symbolic because it's about the messages that we use. I mean, how shocking in communication, right? So it's symbolic because it's about the messages that we use. And we call it convergence because as we share in these stories, in these fantasies, we'll be using that word in a little bit here, we converge together, we fuse. So when people have that common shared vision about their relationship to the universe, well, they find themselves bonding together, and probably under a name of a certain, religious group. And it might be a big name, like say Jewish, right? But then within that, whether or not one identifies as being liberal or reformed or various terms, and I'm not especially familiar with the contemporary Jewish traditions to really speak more about that, but you get the idea, right? That as we have these common views, of the world, these common visions, we use that word a lot, right? We converge together. That's how we really form groups. And part of that convergence comes from an agreed upon understanding of cues. And the cues are the symbols, the images, the words, the references, right? That we have a common understanding of those cues, right? We have a common understanding of them. So there's agreed upon understanding of cues. And we reference a lot here probably today bumper stickers, because bumper stickers and logos and little magnetic things people put on their cars tells us a lot about the things that they believe in. And sometimes you might see one and you don't know what it's about. There's no agreed upon understanding of cues. And so we're seeing people putting "Don't tread on me" on the back of their bumper sticker, and I thought, are these like colonial history buffs? Like I don't quite understand, right? So I didn't understand how that represented certain views uh, about U.S. politics and the nation and other stuff. So in symbolic convergence theory, a question to ask is, so when has this convergence occurred? And we're not going to get too deep in this when we're doing fantasy theme analysis. We don't get too deep in it. But we do, and the book talks about the sums, you're looking at fantasies. You want to be aware of whether or not there's really much of a community behind it, right? Is there any convergence there, right? And so it's when people respond. And the book, and by the way, the chapter of this book, you might notice, is written by Thomas Indris, not by the authors, the book's author, who is Selnow. Indris wrote this chapter. And so as Indris says in the book, right, when people respond, might be things like when there's a lot of those DVD box sets of a TV show being sold, or I guess being purchased, right, that tells us that that narrative, that vision is doing a lot for people. When a TV show or when a movie is very popular, that tells us that people, they're resonating to it, they're responding to it, right? So it might be that people applaud. It might be that people repeat something, right? Those might be signs of convergence. It may just be that something is very popular, right? That's a really, perhaps a good way of assessing whether or not people have responded to something. It's just about its popularity, right? And part of it also is, how much do you see in culture that there's only a cue being used? Must the entire fantasy be explained, or is there only a cue and people are triggered by it? And again, the book uses a lot of references to the Big Bang Theory, which is sort of tough for me because I actually never really got into the show. And so I had this very secondhand knowledge of it from my wife, from my mother-in-law, who were huge fans of the show. I'm not sure I've ever seen an episode all the way through. I might have, but I'm not certain I have, right? And so when my mother-in-law told me one time that she was babysitting my daughter, she was just a baby, and Eleanor wasn't going to sleep, and she began singing Sleepy Kitty. Is that the song? There was book references. I'm not going to look it up right now, but seeing that song, I was like, oh, okay, that sounds nice. What is that? So it had to be explained to me. So she and I had not converged together in the sharing of that vision, right? That we might draw from Big Bang Theory. So here you go, got rhetoric. Now, I think this is very funny or sort of cute. If you look at it and you're like, I don't know. That there's a black field, those white letters that are of that font, that there's the word got, and then a noun, and there's a question mark, all of that. If you see it and you go, oh yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, I think it's all that clever, but you get what's going on there, like why is it formatted that way, then you're familiar with the Got Milk campaign, right? So what's that about, right? Well, it's a riff on, got milk, got rhetoric. Why does it work? Well, because that campaign was very popular, right? It was very popular, and then you saw lots of got things around. So that's why it works. It was a sort of this shorthand for something that was very common and people needed or needed more of, perhaps. But does it work? I mean, I don't know if it works for you, right? When you see it, does it mean anything to you? If not, then we know that you and I have not converged over the cultural reference of got milk, into which I'm now trying to interpose in here this notion of rhetoric in the place of milk. So this thing, right, got rhetoric only works if you're familiar with the Got Milk campaign. And if you're not, you're like, I don't know, man, right? So that's what that is, right? So it's about whether or not we have something shared for this to resonate with us.